got it for the mic. Can't hear you.
Are you on?
Yes.
Okay. So, well, it's always a treat to hear Katie read, but there's something even bigger, maybe, to look forward to, definitely. Her second book of poetry, Mouths Open to Name Her, is forthcoming from LSU Press in March of 2019. It was selected by former Louisiana Poet Laureate Ava Level Heyman as part of the Barataria Poetry Series. Katie's debut collection, The Belmar, won the Lena Miles Weaver Todd Prize and came out from Pleiades in 2015. Katie is also the recipient of the New Millennium Poetry Prize, the Missouri Review Editors Prize, an NEA State Fellowship, and an SLS Fellowship. The poems have appeared in New Millennium, Rattle, Frontier, Radar, The New Guard, Southern Quarterly, Prairie Schooner, Verse Daily, Pleiades, the Missouri Review, Deep South Magazine, and elsewhere. Mostly documentary in style and spare in tone and imagery, Katie's poems most often center story and character. Poet Alicia Ostreicher describes these poems as quietly urgent. I would add fearless, immensely skilled, and almost unbearably moving. Katie teaches creative writing at Bossier Parish Community College. She lives here in Shreveport with her husband, son, right back there.
There they are. Family.
And they're not here. The oddly shaped shelter dogs, they're not here. And despite having an office, she writes most of her poetry in bed. Katie.
All right, thank you.
Hi. This is a special night for me. It's my son's first poetry reading. He's 4, so we're hoping he still won't know what most of these words mean. Really have to hear most up there at certain points, Dad. So I wrote new poems for this commission, and they're upstairs on the wall, and there are copies of each one for sale in broadside form. So I'm going to just read a couple of those since I read them a couple weeks ago and they're upstairs, and I thought this would be a nice time to also read you some of the work that's forthcoming in my book. So a little mixture of things, and because I am badly prepared, I'm actually going to read some of the poems off the broadsides of a printer malfunction. So the first poem that I wanted to share with you is called The Blades. And this was a poem that I wrote in response to the Me Too movement really getting started. As each story piled on one after another, people had a lot of different responses to those, understandably. A lot of those responses were hurt, a lot of those responses were surprise, which is ridiculous. We shouldn't be surprised by any of this. But my response was mostly seated in anger. And so this was a poem that was the best way I could figure out to address that angry feeling, and I channeled it into, oddly, a kind of fairy tale. This is called The Blades. In the New World, as the goddess dictated, each time a man touched a woman against her will, each time he exposed himself, each time he whistled, dropped something in her drink, photographed her in secret. She sprouted a wing from her spine, not feathered like birds or angels, not cellular, translucent, veined like dragonflies, but a wing like a blade, like a sword hammered flat, thin as paper, one wing per wrong. At first, the women lamented, all their dresses needed altering, their blankets shredded,
their own hair sliced off like a whisper as it grew down their backs. And those who were misused by fathers, bosses, drunken strangers, evening after evening, were blade-ridden, their statures curved downward like sorrow under such weight. But this was not the old world of red letters or mouthfuls of unspoken names. Not the old world of women folded around their secrets like envelopes, of stark rooms where men asked the women what they'd done to deserve this. And the goddess whispered to the women in their dreams, and they awakened, startled, and knew the truth. They pinned up their hair, walked out into the morning, their blades glittering in the sun, sistering them to each other. They searched for the woman with the most blades, found her unable to stand, left her dead, nearly crushed beneath the blade's weight. They called her Queen. They lifted her with hands gentle as questions, flung her into the air, saw her snap straight, beat the wings at last, and they followed her, a swarm of them, terrible and thrumming, to put the blades to use. Now you're committed and you have to clap after all of that. This next poem is kind of an extension of my thinking and writing about sexual violence against women and how that has many different manifestations for women. Some abusers, or some abused people become abusers, some abused people develop depression or anger, but a lot of women take out the trauma of abuse on themselves. And for me, this in many ways manifested in body dysmorphia and eating disorder. So several of the poems that I have kind of forthcoming and some on the wall upstairs have to do with kind of how those two ideas are connected. So this poem, when I submitted it for this display, was initially called 13 Ways of Looking at an Anorexic, which is a reference to the Wallace Stevens poem, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And so if you've ever read that poem, it's 13 stanzas, basically where Stevens is just like vamping on blackbirds, but they're all really separate from each other. And it's sort of like 13 different personalities almost. And so that's kind of what I was going for. The title has now changed to The Most Necessary Thing. Psychologists believe anorexics are trying to return to the bodies of their girlhoods. I tell the woman helping me choose clothes that I am a 4, as if it were my name. Last year I was a 10, and then a 6. Myself shrinking like a countdown. And well I know there is a 0 on the rack. There is a way I know to disappear. 0 comes from the Arabic sifir, which means empty. Anorexic is from the Greek anorexis, without desire. Some religious men call this perfection. At 10, my breasts grew. A boy in class pretended to admire my necklace, but held them, daring me to speak. There are 1,000 ways to harm a girl like this, and I know them all. I know the weight of fingernails and hair, tonsils, spleen, things I could move. I know the bone, the marrow of the bone, the brittle inside of a woman, the girl who wishes never to need anything, to live on air. I know the circumferences of each limb in centimeters, inches, finger lengths. A woman says she envies my control. I want to say, you are already lost. I want to say, envy is just another word for hunger. The hips I had were gripped and forced been used, and even then he said he could never love a girl as big as me. Now there is no place his love could fit, no thing to fill his hands. I could slide him away like a plate across stone. There are no ways to harm a girl like this. You're dying, the doctor says. No, I am compressing, condensing into only the most necessary thing. A woman I know can carve cities into peach pits. The most dangerous words a girl can say are, I want. We will never be safe in these skins. So my new book is called Mouths Open to Name Her, and it is very much a book about motherhood and the different phases of motherhood, starting with girlhood and our bodies changing, moving all the way to sort of end of life. And the way that these poems are structured is mostly in the form of vignettes or thumbnail portraits. So they're not really about me, or at least most of them aren't about me, they're about other women. And some of these women are real women, and the stories are absolutely journalistically true. And some of the stories are more composites of different women when records weren't kept for certain reasons. So I just wanted to share a couple of those with you. These two in particular are meant to be read as a pair. So one of them takes place in Los Alamos, New Mexico in 1945, which of course is when the atomic bomb was developed and tested for the first time. And the other one takes place at the same moment, the same time in Hiroshima, Japan. So the poem set in New Mexico is based on a real woman, and this is a real story about her labor. Los Alamos, New Mexico, 1945. Elizabeth Graves walks through a contraction in a sweltering hotel room with her husband and a Geiger counter. The bomb she built, first of its name, exploded hours ago in the desert, its outcry faint and soft over the radio. When they'd hired her husband, promised him mountains and a name, they hadn't known the lovelier Dr. Graves. They soon discovered she was the key. Only a handful of people alive understood fast neutron scattering. Only a few could operate the particle accelerator. She could, she who now wills her water not to break. Her husband exhales on her nape, grips her thin wristwatch, ever the numbers man. How far apart, he asks her. She's forgotten the counting. Any moment, the fallout will register on the machines, and her name will be born to the future, and cannot be unborn. Women bravely bear the pain of birth, they say, because what is the alternative? A man can flee a war, desert his unit, keep his hands unbloodied, but we cannot outrun our bodies. A woman bears down brute animal to do the work of making. The wave of a contraction rises, and she flattens her palms on the table. Liz, I have you. Think of something else. Think of a name. But all she can think of is what she will be called when this morning is flattened onto the pages of history, when mouths open to name her. Perhaps they will call her Mother. And the accompanying partner poem, again, takes place sort of in my imagination at the same moment. This is called Hiroshima, Japan, 1945. In the final hours of pregnancy, Yoshiko has come to understand her skeleton. To a woman's small hands, the trunks of the great akamatsu trees were hard as stones, but the right breeze could bend their tops. Bones bent, too. A storm inside her rose. The bark of her body grew soft, bent outward, making way. The midwife held her hands for balance as she crouched over old blankets. Yoshiko screamed, "Picture something sweet, girl. Think of your man." Her husband's body, soaked with seawater, littered the Pacific with 1,000 others. She hadn't loved him, his rough hands, his ugly fumbling in their bed. He'd struck her once. He was weak, and it had not hurt. Sending him to war had not moved her heart. She was able to eat shishamo again, which he had not liked. He'd never known about this child. It was hers entirely, hers for every coming sunrise of her life. Once more, the midwife said. Something splintered, then gave, split her wide. Something slid between her feet. "A daughter," said the midwife, swaddling the girl in a torn jacket. "A daughter," thought Yoshiko. Her husband would have grieved, but inside Yoshiko, a dormant flower bloomed. The midwife settled the girl in her arms, and Yoshiko saw her own brows and eyes, tiny, mirrored back. The baby took her nipple. "Daughter," she thought, as the damp palm searched her breast, as the milk came. "Daughter," she thought, "the war is ending." "Daughter," she thought, "there will be afternoons of jasmine, of braided hair, simple suppers in the yard. I will feed you from the garden." "Daughter," she thought, "I will ferry you. I will be your cool shade and your help. I will teach you each live thing's name. I will name you Asuka, the smell of tomorrow." I'm just going to read one more, and this kind of ends on a happy note, I think. This is another true story about a woman named Inez who lives, she's still alive, in Mexico. And I found this story while I was researching the history of cesarean sections, and I got onto, I guess, Wikipedia, and at the bottom they listed a bunch of sources, and there was this one little link that said auto-cesarean, and I said, what is an auto-cesarean? Click it. Well, it's obviously a woman giving herself a cesarean section, and there are 24 recorded cases of this happening in human history, and this is one of them. Unnamed Hamlet, Oaxaca, Mexico, 2004. Inez's 8th baby had died inside her. Her waters long broken, she was too far from town, from the doctor, from the knife she needed to rescue the child from herself. It struggled at the end, then stilled, drowned, just as it glimpsed the shore it knew it would never reach. Tonight, another child threatens its own death, pressing hopelessly down between her legs and will not come. Her husband is far away in El Campo, cutting illegal lumber. No matter, he could not save her anyway. "Benito," she screams to her 8-year-old son. He comes solemn and steady. She presses her last coins into his hand, tells him to buy a sharp knife from the tiny shop in the next village. The boy, who has seen death before, runs too fast to see. Inez rocks back and forth on her knees, remembering the child who had lived and stopped living in her body. Grief felt like contractions in reverse. First, it came in waves so close together that they all seemed like one long storm, one that would level a woman. Then, as time went on, as the welcome burden of everyday things returned, the waves spread out. She would be pounding corn and feel it coming, feel it rise, peak, sting her, and ease away. The baby thrashed under her navel, and she knew that she would die. By candlelight, she lay against the wall of her rough, empty house and tipped homemade mezcal back into her throat. Benito returned. "Mama, a knife," he said, closing her fingers around it. "Take the others away," she croaked. "Find help." When she was alone, she finished off the liquor, spat the word, and pictured every pig she'd ever slaughtered in her life. Flesh was flesh, animal, muscle, vessels, and veins. She leaned back and pushed her hips forward so her womb was pressed against her skin. The child kicked as she opened herself. The blood was black in the low light. She cut again. She cut 3 times, hands slipping, screamed, and went limp. Her intestines felt warm outside her, blood like a blanket. But then the dead boy's fingers ghosted across her brow, and she recalled the unmoving weight of him, of that one, the cold stone of her child who never breathed. She inhaled and found the thin film of her uterus, gripped the knife. She slit and found the child's ankle, pulled him into the world. He cried. He cried, and she inhaled it like a drug. She named him, had barely time to love him, and she lay him at her side, sliced the cord that joined them, and began pressing her organs back inside her the best she could. Her vision flickered in and out. The candle died in the night. Later, after the tailor came and sewed her, after she was carried in the hills to a lorry, her insides still contracting, after the hours in the dark, after the doctor at last, she saw the boy open his eyes and knew it would be a long time before grief would visit her again. Knew that her body, which had been a coffin, an ocean, a tomb, was also a doorway, a candle, a weapon, a ship. Thanks, Katie. That was really something. Thank you so much.
So, I really hate cliches, but it really is a small world. In the mid-1980s, in Charlottesville, Virginia, my husband was a young graduate student at UVA, and he was teaching, and on the same hall were 2 assistant professors, Peter Worth and Ann Fisher. Shortly before leaving the university, they to the University of Mississippi in Oxford, and David here to seminary. David and I enjoyed watching them, the 2 of them, who are also actors, along with their 5 small children, perform Shakespeare in the university's historic gardens. It was Midsummer Night's Dream. So, how fun, after 30-odd years, to have the privilege of introducing Ann Fisher-Worth. She has good news as well. Ann's 6th book of poems, These Things, has just been accepted by Terrapin Books in their 2018 Open Book Competition and will appear next year. Her 5th book of poems is Mississippi. Check it out, it's right over there. It's a gorgeous poetry, photography collaboration with Maud Schuler Clay, published by Wings Press this year. With Laura Gray Street, Ann is co-editor of the Echo Poetry Anthology, 625 pages of nature and eco-poetry from Whitman to the present. Ann's work appears widely and has received various awards, including 2 Mississippi Arts Commission fellowships and the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Poetry Award. She was awarded a 1994-1995 Fulbright to Fribourg, Switzerland, and was 2002-2003 Fulbright Distinguished Chair of American Studies at Uppsala, Sweden. She's had residencies at Djurgården, Hedgebrook, Mesa Refuge in Cummock in France, and was the 2017 Ann Spencer Poet in Residence at Randolph College. A senior Black Earth Institute fellow and member of the board, she teaches and directs the Environmental Studies minor at University of Mississippi and also teaches yoga in Oxford, Mississippi, and she's an English professor. So, I'm happy to introduce Ann to talk about Katie.
So, thank you everybody. I'm going to just read to you what I wrote about Katie, and there's a little bit of overlap because I love some of the same poems. For this show, Katie Bickham has submitted 5 new poems, which she has given to 5 artists who have made broadsides to accompany them. These poems are powerful and dark. They offer an unflinching look at some human longings, especially what Freud called thanatos, the death drive, that, as Freud says in Civilization and Its Discontents, is as primordial, as central to human existence, as eros, the drive for life and love. Katie's poems are written with such skill and honesty that the results are at the same time disturbing and beautiful. For instance, A Different Animal and 13 Ways of Looking at an Anorexic, as their titles indicate, are about bulimia and anorexia. I am a creature dragging back to its own ooze, a broken beast, rotten with the sickness my dog can smell, she writes in A Different Animal. God was alive in those years, and I knew he saw me, corseted, flowers fastened in my hair. I looked away. And the one that was called 13 Ways of Looking at an Anorexic, of course, tropes off the famous poem by Wallace Stevens, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, but with very different and specifically feminine subject matter. It reminds me also of Louise Glick's sequence, Dedication to Hunger, in her book Descending Figure, which shares the poem's fascination with becoming physically and spiritually size 0, without desire, as a way to disappear. Like Glick, Bickham understands that this malady especially afflicts young women whose bodies become sources of desire to others and anguish to themselves, who obsess about the, quote, weight of fingernails and hair, tonsils, spleen, things I could remove, who seek control even unto death, who, quote, will never be safe in these skins. L'appel du vide widens the scope of this concern with self-obliteration, reminding us that we all share a fascination with this call to emptiness, the call of the void. It is an eloquent poem in which all the lines are backed up against the right margin, as if metaphorically backed up against the wall. Listing various ways that the poet and her, quote, cheerful husband have imagined hurtling themselves unto death, Bickham concludes that this longing for death, quote, isn't quite despair. Instead, maybe that is all we're after, some certain respite in a cosmic pair of arms, some central chest to crash into that pulls us with its own quiet gravity, some voice that promises if we are brave and reckless with our lives, we will not even have time to fret the fall. I briefly mentioned Blades, but she already read that, so I'll move on to Mourning, a beautiful poem that also occurs in Katie's forthcoming book, Mouths Open to Name Her. When long ago a friend of mine from graduate school became a mother, she told me, quoting Francis Bacon, I have given hostages to fortune. This poem about Bickham's baby son confronts that vulnerability. The day wakes and says, give him to me. I don't think I'll hurt him, but thinking of the world, our world, in which children are hit by bombs, lit up by bullets, washed up like messages in the ocean, the poet exclaims, it feels wicked to love him this much, to love him at all on such a ruthless rock as this. But as she concludes, The day keeps offering up its boys, saying, love them or return them to the earth. The earth waits, ready to kiss them with its hungry mouth. ... In a few months, Katie Bickham's book, Mouths Open to Name Her, will be published by Louisiana University Press. And she told me that except for the press, I'm the first person who has seen the whole thing. A few months ago, when Katie won the Critical Mass Writing Competition, I spoke about the poems that constituted her writing sample. It is such a pleasure to see these poems in the company of the others. And the main thing that I want to say about this book is, buy it. It is a magnificent collection of poems about the lives of women, especially mothers, throughout history and throughout the world. Many of whom lived obscure lives, as Virginia Woolf says, in a room of one's own, remain to be recorded. Sometimes Katie writes about herself, as in the poem called Naming, which plays with the fascination girl children have with their fluctuating, romanticized identities. Quote, I was Sophia, or Helen, or Rose, Genevieve, or Julia. Eventually, she conjectures, perhaps names are a house we learn to live in. And then she finally pays homage to her mother's having named her Catherine in lines that almost make me get tears in my eyes. Quote, someday, when I am old, I will hear her calling my name in the wind, and I will finally say, yes, that is me, I am coming. They actually do make me get tears in my eyes. But she writes as well about a panoply of women, old-time abortionists, women who can't nurse, unwed mothers and their bodies and the bodies of their babies buried in Dublin convents. She writes about war and God and torture and slavery, forced sterilizations, medical experimentations, all the ills that female flesh is heir to. And she writes about sex and joy and the love of a mother for her daughter whom she saves from genital mutilation. She writes about courage, most especially Inez in the poem that you just heard, the woman in Unnamed Hamlet, Oaxaca, Mexico, 2004, who performs an unanesthetized cesarean on herself because she is so desperate that her 9th child should live. And when the baby does live, knows it would be a long time before grief would visit her again. So finally, this is a praise book. Praise for the female principle, the goddess evoked by the volume's title, who is never visible but everywhere named. And praise for life itself, as in the opening poem, Good News, which celebrates all the babies of the earth, the 350,000 humans born each day, and the, quote, millions of featherless birds bucking shells, minnows clumsy in cold currents, downy puppies with flat noses, or the lowly billion tomatoes taking root, acorns gaining purchase, moss doubling on 100-year-old trees. And so, Katie Bickham concludes, if you're tired or low, or lost your keys or your faith, all you have to do to buck you up is imagine life. An army of innocents yawning their first breaths over the globe, and the promise that it will all happen again, just like this, just as imperfectly, no matter what, tomorrow. So.
You go right ahead.
All right. All right. So, first thing I got to say is, Pam, you tell that story way better than I do about why I came here, so I will never tell it again. I can't even think of all the phrases that you used to create that folktale, but it was quite magnificent. So I thought I'd break with Ashley's form a little bit here and introduce Josh here, Joshua Chambers, and introduce Lawrence Martin, who's going to talk about his work. And I have a few words to say about Josh as well. Not too many, so I won't steal any of Lauren's thunder. First off, I feel like I had just a small role in the history of Joshua Chambers', good reception for his work. Because a few years ago, I think it was 2014 as I recall, I invited a young critic from San Diego, Lauren Buscemi, to come here, who chose Josh's work for the same honor as this evening, first solo show in this critical mass. His critical mass series, your two shows. And then, of course, I invited Alicia, who chose your work. And then, and now Lauren's going to talk about the work. So I feel like I've had all the critics that have talked about your work and picked that set for this series. So I feel like, that's something that I enjoy about it. All right, so I'm just going to introduce you very briefly here. I'm going to read a little quote that I like from your statement about yourself that I think helps sort of comment on what you do. Quote, I depict my characters in moments of contemplation, immediately preceding their resulting actions. I like the fact that it's sort of like they're contemplating what they're going to do, and then maybe they're going to do it. And I can't even tell you exactly why, but I've often thought of a brief, famous quote from Shakespeare. Of course, there's many famous quotes from Shakespeare. When I looked at your work, and that's the one, words without thoughts, never to heaven go. And I thought, well, it's like these words have so much thought that these characters have to think about these and contemplate these things before they ever do anything. Okay, so a little bit about your biography. Joshua Chambers got a BA from Northwestern State University in Oklahoma, and then an MFA from Louisiana Tech University in 2009. He's exhibited locally at, obviously, at Space and at Aurora Borealis, and he also shows at Graphite Gallery in New Orleans, where I believe you had, was it one or two solo shows? Okay. And then he's also in the collection of the Missouri Museum of Art, and he resides in the Bossier Parish with his lovely wife Leanne and his daughter Sophia. All right, now I'm going to introduce Lauren Smart, so we can, and then you can go in sequence. Lauren Smart is a journalist and a critic, and she's on the faculty of the Journalism Division at Southern Methodist University, better known as SMU. Her work as a writer has appeared in the Dallas Morning News, Arts Plus Culture Texas, Culture Map Dallas, Cowboys and Indians, and American Theater Magazine, among others. And I do love including them on Cowboys and Indians. All right, and she has developed and oversees the Storytellers Without Borders initiative, which is between the Dallas Public Library and the Dallas Morning News, and transforms high school students into community journalists. And this initiative is funded by the Knight Foundation. She holds a master's degree in arts journalism from Syracuse University and a bachelor's degree in journalism in English from Southern Methodist University. And as Pam mentioned, this is her second time coming for Critical Mass. And some of you remember she chose Marilyn Couch as the artist on the earlier Critical Mass, which I think was quite a prescient choice, since Marilyn then went on to sort of become quite a prolific painter after she had been chosen. Before that, she hadn't painted in like nearly 20 years. So I thought that was a pretty remarkable story. Anyway, so Josh, if you want to come up and say a few words, and then you can turn the baton.
Okay, so I'm just going to briefly just talk about some things that usually come up and get asked about my work. So usually the first thing people tell me when they see my work is that it's sad, or that it's funny, or that they laughed because it's sad, or that they feel sad because they laughed at it. But so which is something that I really enjoy hearing, because I feel like emotions that we have, especially tied to memory, are just are always confused and jumbled and bundled up. And I think that oftentimes, especially for myself, that like when I look back on things and moments in my life and the life of others, like it shifts from perspective. Like happy things turn sad and sad things turn happy. But I'm really drawn to storytelling and fables and fairy tales, and I like that idea that you have these really complex ideas and experiences that are pared down and retold in a manner in which you can convey to children. And then just, there's a beauty in that simplicity. Now my paintings, saying that I'm interested in storytelling, the paintings are not really ever meant to be some sort of linear progression of a story. And I'll get to why that later. But when I'm constructing the paintings, I like to think of creating little scenes out of a play that never really gets completed. But the imagery comes from a lot of historical symbols and things like that, and along the way it gets distorted and morphed into what I needed to do. So I like to latch on to images that are used across many cultures because I feel like they have a wider awareness. But those images that I use that aren't necessarily continued use for their symbolic choices or their symbolic history, I like to tie in the ecology or the ecological history of the thing, and then tie in my own associations with it. A lot of the animals become characters. Like I try to embody them with a humanness, and so like the things like the ape and the crane and the sloth and the sparrow, those all become stand-ins for people and characters in the stories. And then the newer commonplace objects like bottle rockets and mattresses and things like that, those all become hopefully a way that the viewer can begin to decipher a greater meaning to the story. And I choose those because of their familiarity, because we recognize them so easily. A lot of times then what I'll do is I like to include some sort of mechanical object or a piece of technology that's either antiquated or on the verge of uselessness, like the diving equipment. Like it's really useful when you're underwater, of course, but it's really terrible to try to walk around with wearing it through life. And like, for instance, the ladder in the moon and the sparrow, it's nothing's worse than a ladder that doesn't quite reach things. So once those images are kind of combined, then I like to set them in what to me are reminiscent of stage lighting and scenic design. That was a big part of my education, was being involved in theater just by proxy with who I was dating at the time and later married. My wife was really into theater, and so I fell in love with this idea of this three-wall box coming to life with just color and simple additions. Fell in love with absurdist playwrights and deconstructed sets and all that sort of stuff. So once I have those images, then I'll begin to compare them with text that I've written down. And I always carry some sort of notebook with me where I can write down quotes and snippets from conversations either I have with people or books that I'm reading at the time, and then I like to dissect them and fragment them so they can become a little bit more charged than they were at the time, and then pair those together. Now, the recessing them into the surface, that came from being a printmaker. I really fell in love with the printmaking at one point because there's a process, if you've ever done intaglio or etching, you exert an immense amount of pressure on a piece of paper to transfer the image into the paper. And there's something, and I know I'm not the first artist that's ever made this connection, but there's something really beautiful, and for me it links to the process of memory, that like you have this harsh, slow thing that embeds it into the paper. So those misremembered quotes, which is what a friend of mine likes to call them, those misremembered quotes also become a point where it can begin to be that point of entry for someone approaching the work. And then everyone always seems to ask, like if they're specifically about me. They begin they begin from an autobiographical point, but at some point I tried to distance myself from them a little bit, well, a lot of it. But so that way the viewer has the opportunity to enter into them and begin to add what they think it means and what they decipher it as. And that's where I'll come back to what I said about being interested in storytelling. Like I don't create these to create a greater story, but what I ultimately love to see is that point when a viewer or an audience has seen it and they're standing in front of it and they're talking about it, or after they've purchased it and they want to talk to me about it, is that moment when, because so much was left out and so much is unsaid and unclear, that they start to figure it out themselves. And to do so, they have to pull from themselves to try to figure out what the meaning is. And in the process, they begin to build stories around the imagery. Like they try to piece things together and make sense. And I love that moment when they turn to the person next to them and start a dialogue, because they want to see if they're right, or let the other person know that they're right. But then that moment when they go outside of themselves and start a dialogue with the person next to them, and in that moment they start to tell each other stories about their own lives. That's the part that I really love about it. So that's pretty much it.
Very exciting news for you, Joshua. I did that when I was writing today, so here we go. So I think as Bob mentioned, I technically didn't pick Joshua, but I'm really grateful that I'm here and get to see your work in this new context for me, and got to write about it and spend some time with it. I got here yesterday around 1, so I've only spent about 26 hours here sort of thinking about it. So this is draft number 1. Bob will give me a real deadline to get him draft number final, but eventually he'll get one, and he knows that he has to give me a deadline because that's how I work. It just is. And so I'll just get into it, and then if we want to talk about whatever, we can talk about whatever. The first thing that's likely to catch your eye in Joshua Chambers' exhibit, Let's Use Our Words, isn't language at all. If you're anything like me, it's the color. It wouldn't be wrong to call the purples rich and the blues bright, and his use of ombre, slowly blending one color into another, tantalizing. It wouldn't be wrong, but it would be reductive. The words rich and bright wouldn't be right, just wouldn't be right. And language is what to pay attention to in this show, or more correctly, be disappointed by, which is not to say that the show is disappointing at all, quite the contrary, it's actually quite delightful. Although it won't fill you with delight, in fact it might fill you with sadness. God, words are so difficult. Perhaps words are not enough, or perhaps, as the early 20th century philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein purported, the inexpressible is contained inexpressibly in the expressed. In his work, Chambers juggles this paradox, and I do mean that he juggles, because I mean that he continually tosses these ideas into the air and plays with them. He juxtaposes melancholy, occasionally desolate themes and ideas with bright, pleasurable colors, and in that way, he explores the human condition. I feel like the elephant in the room should be addressed, which is that a few years ago I was the year-long visual arts critic for this critic program, and I used the word pedantic to describe the piece I saw by Chambers. And I should say this, I still agree with myself, but I should clarify. To be pedantic is to be of a pedant, which is a person who is excessively concerned with minor details and rules. And even though the connotations of the word tend to be negative, I would argue here before you tonight that it is the details and maybe even the rules of Chambers' art that makes it so wildly appealing in this exhibition. Behind me, you'll see an alphabet, which, depending at risk of being prescriptive, and depending on how you want to look at the exhibit, I might argue is a sort of map's key to this exhibition that we're in right now. It could be interpreted here as Chambers' literal alphabet, if you're interested in looking at the exhibition literally. A, as you'll see over here, is for apathy, in which you'll see the mattress attached to a string to a balloon. A symbol you might recognize from the first painting if you're encountering this exhibition in chronology, in a chronological viewing. And I will momentarily explain why I think this is a worthwhile endeavor to view this exhibition chronologically. And then you'll see B is for boring, and C is for cry, and D is for discarded, and you'll see the purple yarn that you'll see in a few works in the exhibit around you. E is for empty, and so on. If you want to understand his work or interpret his work through a literal lens, and he has here tonight asked us to use our words, you start to take the symbols in the alphabet series, assign the words to them, and then you can take those words to the paintings and better understand the content narratively. So if we were to interpret the work of Chambers here both literally and holistically, that is to say as a complete thought-out exhibition, and I think it would be fair to do so, although I think he just told me not to. You might, I argue, say he is someone concerned with minor details and rules, perhaps even excessively, and maybe that would make him someone functioning pedantically in a really useful way, and not as an insult at all. And the payoff for me has been pretty fantastic. Because for me, when text exists in a painting, you are meant to pay attention to it. And if you follow the exhibition chronologically and you pay attention to the text, you begin to build a narrative, which, although obscure and perhaps abstract, will resonate with your innate humanity. Let me just read you the names of a few works in order. Keep Your Emotions, She Worries Me, They Move in Expected Ways, They Moved in Expected Ways, They Came Together to Make Sense, You Make It Easier, Let's Enjoy, You Really Tried, and that, if you can see that blue from over here, it's gorgeous. Hold Me, Smiles and Smiles, The More I Was Less, I think I'm coming correctly, and this is my favorite, and it's called, and excuse my French, well, fuck. I feel like that if you've been in a relationship, you understand well. And in that painting, the monkey in the life vest is, for me, attached in the alphabet to S is for sad. You can see him there. But what Chambers is also doing with a vicious intelligence in this work is playing with the idea of life's construct. And She Worries Me, which is the one with the ladder. You probably can't see it from here, you can look at it later. His use of perspective gives the ladder the appearance of resting against the back of the canvas, as though the color is the backdrop in a Hollywood movie. And in that same work, the moon is suspended from the sky by the string. And you see that sort of motif throughout. There's one with the man in the suit shooting stars up on strings into the sky. And it simultaneously calls to mind artists like Alex Israel, whose work functions as a commentary on Hollywood's artificial replication of life, and also seems to harken back to the idiom of the person you're falling in love with being someone who hung the moon. And so I think through symbols, language, and color, Chambers has written a love story on these canvases that rewards the patient, thoughtful, thorough viewer, or at least a very human story. Or maybe he hasn't written a story at all, or done that at all, and maybe language can't express the inexpressible, and maybe art can't either. But Chambers has created a new way of trying, and it's pretty magnificent. And I know Pam is going to ask me in the Q&A, so I should just say this now. I don't really have anything to complain about with this show. So you can ask, but I'm not going to give you a good answer. That's it.
Okay, my thought, if everybody's game, is that both the critics come up and both the artists come up, and anybody can ask anything they want of any of them. You like that idea? Yeah. If anybody wants to boycott the idea, I guess they could. Just in case you. A to Z. There's a little bit of a key to some of the other things.
Can't hear you.
I mean,
Can we give
We'll
this?
repeat the question.
would you repeat my question?
Can't hear.
So the question was if I thought of the alphabet pieces as a key. I had not thought about that directly. It's been pointed out to me twice now, and when I was making them, I thought I was trying to condense them down to an image definition of the word for me. So I guess by proxy it became a key to the other pieces. So yeah.
So the word, I was going to ask, did the word come first then for the entire alphabet? Or did you have words that came maybe after some images? Or?
With those, the words came first. What so, one of my students, I was showing my students some work, and one of my high schoolers was like, yeah, like literally, he's not a very effective kid, but he was like, are you all right?
Yeah, we need to build therapy to keep guys for Joshua. Pam, yes.
Josh, I noticed that some of your pieces have already sold in the alphabet, which is great, but then you don't have an alphabet left. So how are you going to show that body of work again? Or are those prints and I didn't realize?
No, they're gouache on paper, so they're one of a kind. But great thing is there's lots of sad words for each one of those letters.
Well, let's talk about Katie's work for a minute, because I don't think that any of us were left with a dry eye when you were reading it. And then to hear Anne reading it, for me, was a very interesting juxtaposition. I mean, I heard the work in a very different way. When Anne was reading it, it didn't become only about you. It became about all of us. But when you were reading it, I was just seeing Katie, Katie, Katie. And of course, my heart was going out to you, to Keith, to your son. But to what extent is it about you, and to what extent is it about all women? Just talk about it a minute.
So my first book, The Belmar, which came out 4 years ago now, I didn't appear in any of the poems, so those poems are all set in like a semi-fictional plantation house in South Louisiana. It's populated with characters. And one of the experiences I had while I was like touring and reading for that book was, I didn't feel like because I didn't appear in the poems, I started to kind of feel like I wasn't being vulnerable enough with my audience, and I wanted that connection. So when I started piecing together the idea for this new manuscript, again, a lot of the poems came out as narratives about other women, but the idea behind the mixture of poems about other women and about me as a mother is to realize that this idea of sort of epic sisterhood is one of the only defenses that we often have against the violence of a patriarchal world. And so every poem is about me, because all mother women, I think, have the same threads connecting us in some way. There have even been studies done and confirmed now that the traumas of our ancestors actually scar our DNA, so we're inheriting the triumphs and tragedies of the people who came before us and gave us life. I also read this really interesting thing recently that said that when female children are formed in the womb, I think as of 5 months old, they already have all of the eggs inside of them that they'll ever have, which means that when your grandmother was pregnant with your mom, you were already inside of her. Oh, right? And so, I just love that idea of women being connected physically or not. So I hope that answers the questions. Yeah.
For Katie, you talked a little bit about the process, how you were led to something like what I did, the Wikipedia page and the unnecessary section. Can you talk a little bit about your research process for finding these women, and were there some women who you wanted to write about?
Yes. So the question was, what was my research process for kind of finding the women's stories, and then was there anything I wanted to write about and didn't or couldn't for whatever reason? So I knew as soon as I got pregnant, really, I knew that probably motherhood would intersect with my work in some way, but I also was sort of in the mire of postpartum depression, and I was not producing writing during the first year or two of my son's life. But I felt that I ought to always be doing something, and so what I was doing was just cataloging. So when I saw, for example, I saw a headline on Facebook about bodies being exhumed from Magdalene Laundry in Ireland at an old kind of girls' home, and they found tons and tons of skeletons of mothers and children who had been basically imprisoned in these laundries, and so I just filed that away. Sometimes I would go searching for things, so I did look for, the history of abortifacients and found stories connected with those. Anytime I could find a primary text, that was what I really, pulled for, an actual woman who journaled or something like that. There were some things that I wanted to write about, but sometimes I either couldn't because I just couldn't find, the records weren't there. I really wanted to write more about infertility, and that doesn't, I didn't really get there. And I don't know if it's just because I couldn't quite embody that. It's kind of a hot, for me it was just a really dark place to go as a new mom, and so I just wasn't ready to do that yet. And it was also hard to find a specific story that I wanted to dig in with. And then there were certain stories where I felt like I didn't necessarily have the right. Maybe it was a woman who was still living her trauma or something like that. And so I just felt ethically like that probably wasn't the right decision. Yeah.
During the Get Lit on Galzelle event, where you met at Pam's home and had authors at a few places, one of the things you did were you put poems in sealed envelopes. And in addition to the books, we could buy a sealed envelope with a mystery poem in it. And that was wonderful. Getting home with the treasure, finding that Saturday morning with a cup of coffee, it's like, I'm going to open my envelope again.
Oh.
And that was just a very special little extra something that I appreciated that went with the book.
Thanks, I'm really touched by that. Thank you.
I had a question for Katie. I saw, in your work, there's it seems like a lot of grit in your work.
Grit?
Yeah, like Southern grit. I know Carson Colors likes to use that, other Southern women writers, Flannery O'Connor. Do you read those writers? Do you consider yourself a Southern writer? Are you ever influenced by them?
Yeah, I think in terms of tonal choices, the writer that inspires me the most, and who I think I may be badly imitating, is Sharon Olds. She's not a Southern poet necessarily, but she writes primarily about the female body, and she writes about it in an intentionally unbeautiful way. And I always found that to be so refreshing, because the female body is so often personified as the flower or the fruit or whatever, and sometimes it's sort of grotesque and horrible, and it's and often dangerous to live inside. So that is a really conscious choice. And she also uses really spare, unbeautiful language, which is also something I'm hoping is coming through in my work. So I do have poems that I think are maybe more lyric and are supposed to sound beautiful in the ear. But if I'm writing about something ugly, I'm not really interested in, the flowery adjectives and things like that. So I am thinking about those tonal choices. But I think Sharon Olds tonally is probably my closest influencer.
I have a question for both of you.
Cool.
With the intensity of the work that you do, with the subject matter, with your own personal paths in your processing, how many vacations do you take a year?
You go.
I don't know. I have a really bad concept of time. So as many as my wife tells me we're taking. So, like, she just lets me know what's going on. I'm like, okay. And then like I go along and it's great. And, yeah, so maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe 3, 4, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I guess my question,
Right, I mean, I think
do you-
the spirit of your question is like, how do you cope, right? Or how do you stay happy or happy enough, right?
Yes, how often do you need to step away?
Right. I write, and I always hesitate when I go read to young folks and they say, like, what's your writing process? Because I think they're asking me, like, to use it. Like, they want to know how to you know, do what I'm doing. And it's so bad. I have the worst habits. But I write in spurts. So, like, I'll schedule a month. Like, I drafted my book in a month or two, like, over a summer. And then, like, mentally, I just can't write every day. I think I would lose my mind. And so, you know, I have months where I really like adult coloring books. I find that to be very soothing. I watch Gordon Ramsay shows. But, you know, they say, like, it's outdoors, exercise, and sex. And, like, you have to sort of, like, balance that serotonin. And I think for me, it's very much compartmentalizing it into a certain space of time and then pushing that away. So I admire people who can write every day and dig into the marrow of life every day, but I don't, I can't. And I have a 4-year-old, so, you know, like, I'm dealing with boogers. Yeah, I mean, so now that you, like, know
Now that I fully understand.
Yeah.
So, I was too literal about it. Okay, so I teach the public school system, so during the school year, I work 20 hours consistently in the studio, usually after my daughter's gone to bed, even if that means I vacuum the floor. But during the summertime, I usually pull 30 to 40 hour weeks in the studio, and I just make sure, and then I have a very small studio.
God, you're embarrassing me so bad.
It makes me feel crazy
So
to say it out loud. So I'm like,
No, I mean, I'm
but,
so jealous.
but like, I also have a very small space to work in, and so I have to be really aware of the logistics of building the pieces and moving them in and out in the cycle of work. So yeah, it's a really regimented process. So
And do you write every day? Thanks, good.
it's not every day.
Affirmation, whatever.
Every other day. It's every other day. That's really what it was.
Yeah.
I had a question for Josh.
Yeah.
In your work, do you find it easier to keep personal elements out of the work for your process, or is there a reason behind keeping personal out and keeping the distance in artwork?
I guess my wife would say I'm a pretty emotionally guarded person, so like keeping the clear personal elements out, yeah, it makes it easier to put them up in front of other people because otherwise it can get embarrassing. But a lot of what's going on in the paintings is a communication to her as well, so like she knows what's going on, and that works out well. But most of the time, I try to keep it as distant as possible from the viewer, just for my sake and their sake, if that makes sense. So yeah, so even when people ask me about personal elements, I still don't ever give them as much as they want.
Can I interpret that my way?
Okay.
Which is that I think you have personal things in these paintings. I just don't think that they're specifically personal. If that makes sense. Like I think you're not just I don't know you, so I don't know what about them is personal to you, but I would argue I've been sure to say personal things in this work.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Everything. I mean, they're all really personal, but specifically not decipherable. Oh, openly to the people viewing. Yeah.
Josh, I want to ask you a question. Can I do that? So, like, I'm I took art history in my undergrad. But to me, like, all your paintings are so aesthetically, like, unified and similar to each other. Like, and you know, do you ever, like, are you ever in your studio and you just paint, like, something really aesthetically different? Like, do you ever just do, like, a landscape or a nude or... do you ever feel trapped by your aesthetic, or do you just like live in it?
Occasionally, I'm worried about redundancy, and I wish I could do landscapes. Like I totally suck at painting landscapes. Like it makes me jealous when I see them really well. But yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I work so much regularly in the sketchbook is to make sure that they don't become redundant.
That's not what I meant. Like, I definitely wasn't saying that they're like so similar that it's not interesting.
No,
I just wondered, like,
I want them to be really
right?
similar.
Yeah.
But like, there is always that risk that like they'll be too similar.
I just know, like, for writers, I think a lot of times I've heard writers say, like, when you become known, and especially if you have a really strong aesthetic, that it sometimes can feel like a trap because you have like a poem in your head that doesn't match, and then like nobody wants to publish it because it doesn't sound like you, that kind of thing.
There has been a couple series where the work diverged drastically, and galleries weren't as willing to show that alongside this work. So that it does happen, but I do it anyway. I enjoy it. I mean, yeah.
A lot of times in our artwork, the personal comes out anyway, even when you don't expect it, even when you don't realize that's what's happening. Do you have any artworks or a series of artworks that have not been displayed because they are more personal?
Yes.
And you won't talk about that.
I just wondered if I was the only one who had that stash.
Yeah. Do you have writings?
Are you? I just feel like that's such a ridiculous question after everything. Like, I actually do. Surprisingly, there's like stuff more ridiculously personal than what I read tonight. But you know, like I think I have a lot of poems about family that I would never, at least not for a whole life. You know? Yeah. So I'm not super cagey about myself, so there's nothing I'm too embarrassed about in terms of sharing it with an audience. But then when it involves the stories of others, there are things that I'll hold back. And those poems, like, I don't intend, those are the ones that like come where I have to pull my car over and it just comes out. But I don't usually sit down to write about, like, I don't want to deal with other people's business. But if it comes out, I just keep it. I'll keep it for 30 years and, I don't know, take it out. Get all of it.
I couldn't resist asking Katie's good question about Josh, about if he has other work that's very dissimilar from his work. Someone told me, and I can't verify this, but do most people know Wayne Thiebaud's paintings? You know, the sort of famous paintings of cakes and pinball machines and candy counters. He was classified as a pop artist, but he really wasn't. He was just kind of a realist who loved painting stuff in his childhood. And then he sort of extended it into other areas like landscape. But apparently someone, a curator who had visited him said he actually, when he wants to relax, he paints abstractions, little abstractions. And was asked if he'd ever shown him, he said, God, no, it doesn't fit what people know as Wayne Thiebaud. In fact, who knows if anybody will ever see him in public, maybe posthumously or something. So I think it's interesting that artists do become defined in a certain way. That doesn't mean they're necessarily boxed in, they can break out of that, surely some artists do. But anyway, it just reminded me of that interesting story. But maybe you have some, well, gestural abstractions hidden in your closet somewhere.
Well, I think in fairness to the process, since Lauren beat me to the punch about was there anything that she would recommend for improvement in Josh or change or any thing in the show that troubled her. And she said, I'm going to say no. I'd like at least to give Ann the same opportunity to respond to Katie's work and just, you know, part of critical review is to see what might have been said differently or wasn't said at all, or that someone said too much, like me, so I'll sit down.
No, I mean, I think that, you know, I feel really lucky to have read Katie's book. I love her book. As the mother of 5 and the grandmother of 6, I'm really into writing about motherhood and, you know, so on and so forth. It occurred to me to wonder what she's going to do next, do you know? Because that's kind of a hard act to follow. I think that what you said, Pam, was interesting when you said that you experienced listening to her read as very much about her, and then you listened to me talk about her poetry, and it kind of had a wider dimension. I mean, for me, all the poetry that I care about most has both those kind of deeply personal dimensions, but then it's like, it's got to be about the world, it's got to be about the cosmos, you know, shared experience, not just human, but other than human life forms as well. So that's what I think the most important poetry is doing. It's like, it's not just gossip, it's not just somebody's private trauma, but private trauma can really feed, I mean, grief, death, longing can really feed great poetry if it speaks to us, you know, to me, to you, men as well as women, dogs, cats. I would like to see Katie write about the natural world, just because I'm such a place-based eco-poet freak, you know? So that's kind of a dare, like, but I'm sure that if she put her mind to it, she'd do splendidly.
And knowing that Joshua doesn't want it to be interpreted as a story, all of the trees and the lighting of the trees on the growth into this forest is too much narrative for me to ignore. So if that would be the case, you'd have to work more closely with the curator for it not to be a story, because it lives as a story now, which I think.
So you're saying it's our fault?
I'm just saying, if he doesn't want it, then that would be something he would have communicated. But I think you did a good job building a narrative, because I think it sort of works for
Subliminal.
I mean, accidental